I'm Rob,
And I'm Nate.
and welcome back to Rob and Nate Record a Podcast. Today's episode, we're going to be talking about the 2020 film Greyhound. Nate, this was your first time seeing this film.
'Twas.
This is my second time seeing it. Why don't you go ahead and give us your first reactions to this?
First reactions. Do we really want to go into my first reactions, or should we say a little bit of background of what this film is?
I want to hear your first reactions.
Because I've been pretty quiet. It gets better.
So you didn't like the open then?
So, technically this film is fine. It looks good. I feel like, technically in the other sense, in terms of authenticity, the way things were during the war, I suspect it's better than average. I suspect it's a pretty dang accurate film. It feels real, but it never really brought me in. There wasn't really characters there that I felt a connection with. Tom Hanks, I suppose, the most of anyone by virtue of his being Tom Hanks. But there wasn't an emotional core to the film. So while it was technically sound and it felt very accurate and real, I didn't emotionally bond with this film basically at all. I think the film got better as it went on, and I thought the last half hour or so of the film, when it's at its most action-packed, was really good.
Yeah.
But most of the film, I was bored.
Really?
Yeah.
I'm a little bit surprised by that.
Mm-hmm.
I thought obviously the Tom Hanks character is the main one here. And I guess now we'll go ahead and dive into some background on this film. So Tom Hanks plays a Captain Krause, who this is shortly after the U.S.'s entry into World War II. He's an inexperienced U.S. Navy commander. As we find out at the end of the film, this is his first crossing of the Atlantic as the commander, or as the captain. And they are being stalked by a group of German U-boats and submarines that they call Wolf Pack.
So Tom Hanks is the captain of one of 4 ships, 2 British and I think 2 American, that are escorting 37 ships containing supplies and soldiers to
A convoy,
Britain,
yeah.
a convoy in February of 1942. So very early in American direct involvement in the war.
Yeah. And, as mentioned, they come under attack by this group of German U-boats, and Tom Hanks has to Captain Krause has to do his best to guide the convoy through and try and defend the convoy, as was common at this time. Numerous boats were lost. There was numerous casualties. At one point, the Greyhound takes a direct hit. 3 sailors are killed. Yeah, this hooked me pretty early. That scene in the hotel and those early scenes on the boat, you get an understanding that Captain Krause is a very religious man. His religion is very important to him, but so is his crew. And he, if I remember correctly, he mans the watch for something like 60 hours straight.
Now this is loosely based on a true story. It's based on a novel.
It's based on a novel, and the novel was based on a true story.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, the novel is based on.
And you had a neat story about how this movie came to be.
So the novel it's based on is The Good Shepherd by C.S. Forester. And Tom Hanks in an interview stated that he was walking through an airport one day and walked into, one of those shops in the airport and saw the book on a shelf. And he picked it up, bought it, read it on the plane, and he enjoyed the novel so much that he began very gradually working on the screenplay. And it was one of these things that in between movies, in between things that he had going on, he would just pick up and continue working on the screenplay. I don't remember how many years that he's been working on the screenplay, but he worked on this screenplay for several years before they finally, got it finished and got around to filming it. He does not, while he wrote the screenplay, he does not direct it. It's directed by Aaron Schneider, who has also directed Into the Storm, 2 Soldiers,
No, those he directed
Get Low, Two Soldiers.
Yeah. And Into the Storm, I believe, is a cinematographer on. And that's half of what he's done is cinematography. I mean, the last film he made before this was Get Low in 2009.
But yeah, I mean, there's some other anecdotes I'll tell you about as we go on. I'm guessing you probably didn't catch on to the main one I'll talk about.
Okay.
But yeah, this film hooked me. It is a little bit slow starting out. It gets into some of the action fairly quickly. I mean, it's probably, 20 to 30 minutes in that they sink their first U-boat?
Oh, I would think longer than that.
That first one?
Yeah. Well, I guess 30 plus minutes. Yeah.
Yeah.
I didn't.
But it becomes apparent as soon as they sink their first U-boat that Captain Krause is not someone who enjoys killing.
Mm.
He does not relish having to kill other people, but he takes his job seriously.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's also apparent that the crew is a little bit skeptical of him.
Yeah.
Like I mentioned, we later find out at the end of the film that this is his first crossing of the Atlantic as a captain. So,
Well, can you guess the film that this reminded me of the most? And a film I would rather watch than this film.
not sure.
Run Silent, Run Deep.
Well, yeah. I mean, I can see some of those
Yeah,
connections.
I mean, it's different because that's the crew's on a submarine.
Yeah.
But here they also have a new captain. They have to deal with submarines.
Yep.
What I missed that film had, one of the things that film had that this film didn't, is more emotional core to the characters. I simply felt more connected to those characters. And one thing I missed was more goings-ons with the crew to kind of make you invested in them. But I get that that's not... Like, you could have take this story and make it as a World War II movie 50 years ago when they had the more ethnic crew kind of storylines. You'd have the Italian and they'd be up to various hijinks. And I get that they're not doing that's not what they wanted to do, that this is a more serious treatment. But it reminded me, just in its basic structure, of those kind of films. And I missed feeling more for the people in the film like I would in an earlier World War II film.
To give you some rundown on some of the other characters in this, Elizabeth Shue plays Evelyn, which is Captain Krause's girlfriend at home.
She is the only woman in the movie.
Yes.
Seen very briefly at the beginning and then in some flashback memory scenes later on.
Yeah. Stephen Graham plays a Charlie Cole. Matt Helm plays a Lieutenant Nystrom. Craig Tate plays Pitts. And Rob Morgan plays Cleveland. And the only other one I was going to mention is... I wonder if you can guess who the other person I wanted to mention was.
I think that Hank, Shue, and Graham were the only people I really recognized in this. I think I might have recognized some of the other faces, but not that I could put...
Lee Norris, Messenger number 2.
All right, tell me about Lee Norris.
You would recognize him. He was in One Tree Hill, Gone Girl, Zodiac, and a long time ago, Boy Meets World.
All right.
So, but yeah, I mean, it's a fairly small cast. Most of the characters in this film are of little or no consequence. We've covered the vast majority of it. The vast majority of it actually is just Tom Hanks.
Yeah.
In fact, it's kind of interesting. In the credits, I don't know if you saw this, Ian James Corlett gets the credit of Dickie. He is the entire boat.
Oh, yeah?
Maximilian Osinski gets the credit of Eagle.
So those are the two other boats in the convoy that they talked to on the radio.
And Dominic Keating is Harry. So that's the three other boats. That's the three other boats, and they're just the voice of those boats. And so it's kind of, but it is kind of funny to look at the credits, and one person gets the credits for the entire ship.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's not, I mean, it's fast paced towards the end, but the majority of the film, this is very deliberate in its pacing. It's steady. It builds some tension.
That was a problem I had with it. I didn't think it built tension really until about halfway through the movie.
Yeah.
And I think it needed it. And Run Silent and Run Deep always had a sense of tension from the very beginning, and this did not. Because that started with the attack of the previous sub. So I almost feel like something bigger at the beginning might have helped it. I also think this would have worked much better on a big screen.
Oh, by far. This is one of those casualties of 2020. This was actually originally being put together by Sony. And I read that Apple paid Sony $70 million to purchase the rights.
Wow.
But this has also been the single largest release on the Apple TV streaming service.
Mm-hmm.
So that resulted in the biggest numbers for Apple TV.
Oh, wow.
So
one other thing I liked about it was it wasn't trying to reinvent the wheel, and it wasn't too long.
And one thing I told you before we started the film, this film is not pretending to be something that it's not.
It's not trying to be the definitive story of what it's a story about. It's a World War II story.
Yeah. This has a box office budget of an estimated $50,300,000.
I heard that.
So it's interesting that Apple was able to purchase it for $70 million from Sony, I guess at that point, Sony, just looking at the
Breaking
landscape of 2020, was just like, okay,
modest.
we made a little bit of money on it. We'll let it go. Apple can do what they want with it. Again, I'm as you mentioned, I'm disappointed this wasn't something we've yet seen in the theaters. I hope at some point we get the opportunity to see this in the theater.
I wonder if that might have actually been good for the movie financially. I mean, not creatively, because again, this would have been better to see on a big screen. But would it have made $70 million on theatrical release?
I think if you put the advertising into it, I'm sure it would have. I mean, World War II movies tend to do fairly well in the theaters. Let's be honest about that. And Tom Hanks, I mean, you put Tom Hanks in the theaters, you're probably going to get $70 million.
No.
So, I don't know. What else do you want to say about this?
Well, I mean, there's a fair number of events in the film. You've got the relationship Tom Hanks has with the man that serves him his food.
Yeah.
Who's always trying to get him to eat, but he can't eat because he's super stressed.
Yeah. And he drinks gallons of coffee.
Drinks of coffee. I was going to mention that I commented that this is just one long, depressing coffee commercial. I wanted to see like the Wilkins coffee logo at the end.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wilkins presents Greyhound.
Pretty much the only thing he consumes through the duration of this film is coffee.
Yeah.
So, but that's, the movie starts out, they're in high seas, they're not going to be able to serve very much, and then pretty quickly they're engaged, and
they have a certain radius in which they can have air support, and then they have
it's what they call the pit. There's the gap in air support on either side.
50-ish hours worth?
I think it was originally supposed to be 60 hours or something like that. So.
And they have to zigzag a bit in the crossing because they have to avoid U-boats, and so that.
Well, it's more just making their pattern less predictable to make it harder for the U-boats
exactly.
to.
Yeah. So it takes a while. Obviously, Tom Hanks' character is getting very little sleep. He is running on coffee. Even though, things happen in this film. It's not just them sitting on the boat. There's scenes where they have conflict with the U-boats several times, where they're dealing with depth charges, where they're dealing with damage to the boats, and they lose some of the boats in the convoy. But there's really not a lot that's memorable. Like there's not a lot that like sticks out to me as like mountains on the landscape of the events of this movie. It's a lot of variations on the same thing.
Yeah. Personally, I enjoyed this film. Again, to me, it was not pretending to be something that it's not. So this is not going to be an overly exuberantly rated film, but I enjoyed it. I had no problem watching that. I'm sure I'll come back to this a few times in the future. But yeah, I felt like it was a solid film.
You felt connected? You felt invested?
Yeah.
You cared?
I enjoyed the Tom Hanks character. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, there's really only two people you care about, Tom Hanks and his XO, that other guy. But yeah, I think this is going to be a relatively short episode, so might as well now move into ratings. Nate, how would you rate this movie?
2 out of 4, probably 5 out of 10, 6 out of 10 maybe.
I like this more than you. I would rate this 2.5 out of 4 on the 4-star scale, and 7 out of 10 on the 10-star scale. Again, I rather enjoyed this. I think if you like World War II movies, you'll find a certain amount of enjoyment in this. If you like sea movies, you'll probably enjoy a certain amount of this. But yeah, anything else to say on this?
Not really.
Well, I'm Rob.
I'm Nate.
And this is Rob and Nate Record a Podcast. Bloop. Yeah, I'm a little surprised you didn't like that.
I just couldn't get into it.
Any idea why?
I don't know. I wasn't feeling it until pretty late in the film.
Do you regret having watched it?
No, I don't regret having watched it. It was fine.
Yeah.
I liked the idea of the film more than I liked the execution of the film. I liked that it was smaller in scale. Again, that it wasn't trying to reinvent the wheel. That it was going to be like any of those, for lack of a better word, throwaway World War II movies that they made in huge numbers for really decades. And I liked the idea of it being one of those, and it kind of was. But it was also, I didn't have anybody to lock on to, really. I mean, there was just no emotional investment. It was all the technical
So you just really
things.
didn't connect at all with the Captain Krause?
No, not really. I mean, he gets residual Tom Hanks goodwill. But the character itself was an understated character, and I do kind of like that. I mean, we've all known the quiet, capable religious types that are kind of boring. I mean, they're admirable, but they're kind of boring. And this whole film kind of had this tone of, there was a piousness to it, but also a dullness to it.
Yeah. Yeah, I can see that. One thing I forgot to mention, one little filming error that I'd kind of indicated to you. There's one scene where when they're on the bridge, you see water dripping on Tom Hanks' hat and in front of his face.
Mm.
There's no way for water to drip into the cabin of the like where they're at in the ship. The studio where they were filming, obviously they built relatively small studios for, for the, or small sets for the cabin there on the wheelhouse on the ship, and the roof on it was leaking.
Oh.
But they had a tight filming schedule, so Tom Hanks finally was like, we got to film, and they couldn't take it out in post, without going to crazy expensive measures, and so it's just there, but there would have been no way for water to get into the wheelhouse in an actual boat. So he talks about that in a couple of interviews that I've listened to about it. So yeah, $50 million budget. I think we pretty much covered everything. So
you're Rob and I'm Nate.
Well, we already did that. I am kind of curious, like, how someone like Apple TV would rate the success of this, because they paid $70 million for it. How many people have to watch it on their service for them to consider it worth it?
I don't know much about Apple TV in terms of how they release that, but my impression, at least as referenced directly to Netflix, is Netflix is kind of famously cagey about it. Like, you can tell a show's doing good for Netflix if it gets renewed, but you don't know how good it's doing.
Yeah, because they don't release their viewership numbers.
So they're not playing on an even Nielsen or box office kind of... You don't get a sense of how they're doing, really.
Yeah.
Which is interesting.
Well, in particular with Netflix, especially as much money as they're funneling into...
I almost don't understand how that's a viable financial model.
This is a conversation many movie watchers having on the Netflix side. Other services are doing it much more sustainably, but Netflix seems to be leveraged to the hilt.
Yeah.
So Apple TV seems to be doing okay. I don't know if they ever release... I've never looked for it, but I don't know if they release any subscriber numbers, But, I mean, it's based on subscriber numbers. It's relatively easy to figure out how much they're taking in. So, but Apple TV has been working on deals with quite a few people. They've produced a few shows. That morning show that they did, that was pretty good. With Steve Carell,
Reese Witherspoon.
Jennifer Aniston. That was pretty good. We watched the first season of that. I believe a second season's coming out pretty soon. I tried watching that For All Mankind show, and it lost me pretty early.
Yeah.
But that's an alternate history type show.
I think M. Night Shyamalan has a show on Apple too.
Yeah, he does. Give me 1 second. I'll pull it up and show you.
Which I've heard is... meh.
I haven't checked it out yet. I kind of want to watch it. I've heard mixed things about it, though. Of course, I showed you the Werner Herzog content on there. Oh, I believe the M. Night Shyamalan is Servant.
Yeah. And then they've got the reboot of Amazing Stories, the Spielberg anthology series from the 80s, which is one of the first shows I remember watching on television that wasn't aimed exclusively at children.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with that one. So
it's Twilight Zone, family Twilight Zone, basically is what it is.
I've heard good things about Dads, but I've had trouble getting motivated to watch that. The one I want to see is On the Rocks.
That's the Sofia Coppola?
Yeah. Yep. Sofia Coppola with
Bill Murray and Rashida Jones.
Yep.
Last week, I watched the Very Merry Christmas, the special that they did
on
for
Netflix.
Netflix back in 2015.
I never finished that.
Also had Rashida Jones in it. Yeah. And it was very much a Sofia Coppola holiday special. It was a super idiocentric thing, that thing.
Yeah. Fun. All right. Well, I'm going to end this.